Hi everyone, Parul Srivastava here from the 1947 Partition archive. Welcome to the third season of Sunday Stories Live, brought to you by the 1947 Partition Archive, which is a global non-profit, non-governmental organization that works tirelessly to preserve the nearly lost oral histories of partition. I'm excited to be hosting this season. As I said, this is the third season of Sunday Stories. The first one was hosted by Noor Anand Chabla. The second season was hosted by Sonam Kalra, and today. And it's my absolute pleasure today to, have this episode with author Hussan Zia Khan. As the name suggests, this event series will be taking place every Sunday. So please be sure to join us. If you wish to watch any episode from the last two seasons, they're available on our Facebook and YouTube pages under the video section. Sunday Stories is a series that will bring to you academics, scholars, oral historians, journalists, and people's personal stories of partition. This season's theme is Understanding Partition through Memory Studies, which is an academic field studying the use of memory as a tool for remembering the past. So today it is my absolute honor to continue the Sunday Stories tradition and facilitate this amazing conversation with Hussan Zia Khan. Let me start by telling you a bit about him. So, Hussan Zia Khan was born in Basti Danishmandan in the west of Jullunder City in December 1933. At the end of August 1947, he moved with the rest of his family to Sialkot in Pakistan. In Jalandhar and along the way, he had the misfortune to witness some of the horrors that accompanied partition. And in 1951, he joined the Pakistan Navy and trained at Britannia Royal Naval College in the UK and various other institutions of the Royal Navy before returning to Pakistan in 1956. He also attended the Royal Naval Staff College at Greenwich in 1967. On his return to Pakistan, he served in various ships and establishments of the Pakistan Navy, including as Deputy Chief of Naval Staff Operations before retiring in 1977. He now lives in Canada from the year 1992, and it was then that he decided to write a family history. So one thing led to another, and he ended up writing a history of Pakistan itself, and a number of other books followed. He has published his correspondence with Christopher Beaumont, as well as a couple of letters from Lord Listowel, who was the Secretary of State in the Attlee cabinet at the time of his book, Muslims and the Partition of India. I welcome you, Hussan sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me.
Same here. I mean, I think we are all so happy that you were able to grace our, this tiny space of Sunday Stories. So I think we can start with, our conversation here. Also, I wish to remind the audience that, whenever you have any questions, you can keep posting them in the comment section. Great. So I was wondering, because you've had a very different sort of career, what drew you towards partition studies? What is it that motivated you in the first place to, research this topic?
Yes, basically, you see, I belong to a community of Pathans who had lived in this place for about 350 years and more or less at peace with the rest of the communities. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, we had to leave and seek shelter in Pakistan. Different families went in different cities and we got scattered. I thought it was necessary that somebody should write about the history of the place from where we came for our future generations so that they know what happened. And then the question arose, why did we move out of there and how come that we are here when we were living for 350 years peacefully there? Everything we had is or was there. And why has it been taken away from us? So this particular thing led me to, I said, if instead of expecting others to do it, why shouldn't I do it? So I started writing this. And in the process of writing this thing, I came across one thing led to another, and I was introduced to Christopher Beaumont. He was the secretary to Radcliffe, who drew the boundary line. And that's where the story started. And then one went into details of it, and I became quite friendly with him. I used to have correspondence with him on various issues as I was writing the book to clarify the things. And he was very kind, God bless his soul. He introduced me to others, people like Sir Ian Scott, who was Deputy Private Secretary to Lord Louis Mountbatten, the last Viceroy, and also to the Secretary of State for India at the time of partition, a gentleman called Lord Listowel. And I had an exchange of letters. He asked me to give my comments on a biography he was writing. So that sort of thing went on. And then I had this wealth of information and I wanted to put it, in detail, because in my biography, it's made only a small part of it. And that's how it went on. And then eventually I ended up writing a history of Pakistan also. But I have published my correspondence with Christopher Beaumont and a couple of letters from Lord Listowel, and I think one or two letters from Sir Ian Scott, which he wrote to Christopher Beaumont on the goings on in Delhi at the time of partition. So that's basically the story.
Okay. So that's fascinating to know. But I think, do you think that there are any myths in this particular field that you
Yeah.
would sort of like to, speak to our audience about?
Mm.
Something that you found in your
Yes,
research?
very much so. Very much so. Actually, this has been a great injustice done to the history of partition, that the official records were not available, or weren't made available to the researchers until about 1985, when the last book of the official documents was published, but even that is not complete. We can go into details if you like
Yeah,
afterwards. And basically, that's what it is. Sorry, I lost track of it. This is a problem with the old age, that
that's
you
okay.
lose track when you're talking. You wanted to talk about, sorry, myths. So what happened was that people had their own versions, and those versions tended to make history. History is not opinions of people or anecdotes. History is a record of what actually happened, and you have to give verifiable evidence to support whatever you are recording as history.
Absolutely.
And what happened was that this was lost, and anecdotes by people, particularly officials and politicians, became history. That's not history. So I sat down while I was writing this thing and tried to figure out where things went wrong, or what particular things which impacted partition, for instance, um, were misrepresented. Not always, but generally. And the first of it is that people think India as a nation. India is a country, or was a country, and it had fluctuating borders. It was a geographical place, a reality, but not a nation. In it lived various people, and they did not mix together to the extent where you could call them a nation. For instance, take what a nation needs for its survival for instance, is you have to have common origin, you have to have a common culture, you have to have a common language, and ethnicity, architecture, heroes, all these things make a nation. If you took India at the time of partition, it had Muslims and Hindus, two main communities, for instance. Hindus don't even marry within their own religion. They don't marry in other castes. Let aside Muslims. So how can we call them Hindus and Muslims one nation when they speak different languages, they have different food, they have different clothes, they live in separate villages or communities inside cities? So all that has to be taken into account before, while considering matters of history in India. It was never a nation. It's not a derogatory thing. It can happen anywhere, but India was not a nation in the defined sense of the word. The second thing which I found was that people say that somehow British connived to have India or divide India. This is not supported in any of my studies. I haven't come across even a figment of evidence to support this argument. On the other hand, there is plenty of recorded documents which show you that Indians from top, or the British from right day one, never actually wanted to divide India. And even to the end, Lord Listowel, I had 2 hours of session with him on related issues. And he kept on repeating that the British never wanted partition. And it was because the situation had become such that India came to be divided. That brings to another point, that it is ironic that partition, the idea of partition, or the idea of Pakistan, was born in a resolution called the Lahore Resolution in March of 1940.
Yeah.
And that gives the Muslim demands what the Muslims wanted after the British had gone. And nowhere in that document is the word partitioning mentioned, except in relation that they wanted a grouping of provinces in a loose kind of confederation that was based on religion. And the basic, not religion, but based on majority of people, majority of population. For instance, in the west of India and in the east of India, Muslims were in a majority. So what the resolution calls for is that these two groups, plus a big central group, where the Hindus were in a majority, they should form a confederation, a loose kind of confederation. And in the end, it says that in the event that Congress doesn't agree to this arrangement, then only we should ask for a separation from India. Only if and Congress, in fact, never did. They didn't agree to it at all. Although it was discussed between Mr. Gandhi and Jinnah in 1944. Interestingly, for the first time, the idea of partition was officially put forward was by Mr. Rajgopalachari, who later on became Governor General of India.
Mhm.
He was the first one to officially propose it. And it was later discussed between Mr. Jinnah and Mr. Gandhi in a series of talks that came
Mhm.
to nothing. So the thing fizzled out at that time.
Yeah.
Um, on Pakistan side, there is a peculiar thing which is absolutely nonsensical, that Pakistan was created for Islam. There is no such thing. Islam is a religion, and Pakistan is a country. Islam doesn't need any country. It lives in the hearts of people, and you don't need a piece of land for it. But the myth persists. On the other side, all the religious uh, gentlemen sort of go talking about it as if this was a religious creation. It had nothing to do with religion, nowhere. The Lahore resolution doesn't mention religion or Islam or Sharia anywhere.
Mhm.
This was the thing. Um, the other myth is that Congress wanted or claimed that they represented all of India. This was never proven on the ground.
Yeah.
In 1945-46, there was an election held on all India basis. And in that, those in the elections those days, Muslims and some other communities had a different seats allocated for them in the provincial assemblies and in the central legislature.
Mhm.
Now, when the elections were held, Muslim League won every single seat from every corner of India, be it then Madras or Bombay or um, Gujarat or anywhere. They won not only in Muslim majority areas, but Muslim seats everywhere in India. And Congress also fielded their candidates based on the assumption that they represented everywhere, all the communities, Muslim candidates in each constituency. Not one of them won it. And
Mhm.
it was the same thing with the religious parties. All the religious parties, Jamaat Islami, Jamiatul Ulama Islam, and Khaksars, all sorts of people, they also fielded, and not one of their candidates was elected, which only goes to show the thinking among the Muslims. They weren't talking about religion, they were talking
Mhm.
about a political settlement. So now, lastly, the myth is about Sikhs. Sikhs lived mostly in Punjab. And in Punjab, they constituted a little over 10% of the population of Punjab. I've gone through all the um, what do you call them? Sorry, lines. The uh, or the census,
Census report.
population
Yeah.
census
Yeah. Okay.
from 1911 onwards. And they
Mhm.
consistently
Mhm.
10.2%, 10.3%, never more than 10.3%. But when the question of demands came, they wanted all of Punjab. They actually, Sardar Badlev saying the proposal he put forward was from all of Punjab, from Ambala all the way to Jhelum. He said that we want this. Now, on what basis they claimed it, God only knows. But that kind of, uh, created a myth in the minds of Sikhs in particular that the Punjab belonged to them, that it was theirs. So this also led to um, considerable amount of trouble in the sense that they felt very angry
Mhm.
when the announcement was made in June that India was going to be partitioned between Muslims on one side and Sikhs were not nowhere to be seen in that arrangement.
Mhm.
They thought that the British would be partial to them, and they will because they had served with the British cause from the days of 1857 war onwards throughout the second or two world wars. They had gone and recruited themselves, served them well, so the British would reward them. What they didn't understand was that India was not didn't belong to the British, but to the people of India, and it was they who decide where what should be. Anyhow, that this feeling was further aggravated by this man, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who drew the line, because in that line he um, gave away three in districts where the Muslims were in majority to India. These included Firozpur, Jullunder, and Gurdaspur to them. So that created a kind of resentment and disappointment about the Muslims, and this uh, the whole thing boiled over. It was brewing, but then it eventually boiled over at the time of partition.
Yeah.
And there was one more thing I wanted to sort of. Oh, yes. The question then arises that why did it happen in this way?
True.
And because, if blame has to be assigned, it has to be assigned on the basis of guilt.
Mhm.
Who did what? And personally, for what it is worth, I am convinced that the riots and all the killing and all the terrible things that happened had nothing to do with religion. It's attributed to religion, but it had nothing to do with religion. I am an eyewitness to this, that it happened because there was no government, there was
Mhm.
no control, and there was no implementation of law and order. So a law and order situation was created where anyone could take anything belonging, as long as it belonged to the other community, and
Mhm.
including killing and injuring and looting and burning went on because there was no fear of any law enforcement.
Mhm.
And this, I think, was principal culprits in this are the British government. They were in a great hurry to leave. And secondly, the Congress Party, unfortunately, because they insisted that British should hand over power as quickly as possible and not give any time for governments to set over, particularly in Pakistan and in East Punjab and in West Bengal.
Mhm.
And this, I think, loss of control led to this tragedy of partition, and nothing to do with religious feelings or anything like that. After all,
Mhm.
people had lived peacefully with each other. These communities had lived for hundreds of years, and they weren't killing each other or looting or burning. And why should they do it at that particular time, except that the circumstances were created? And the reason for circumstances being such was, number one, the British wanted to leave, and secondly, the Congress Party wanted the British to leave.
Mhm.
Jinnah kept crying for it that he wanted more time, but nobody listened to him. They weren't in a mood to listen to anyone.
Mhm.
This is the tragedy of India.
Yeah. So as you mentioned that, like there were three cities, three districts that were Muslim populated, that ultimately, came to India, which includes the city of Jalandhar, where you're from, and you have written a book on that called Pathans of Jalandhar.
Yeah.
So I would, love to hear from you. What's your argument, like in that book, and what are your unique findings from that?
Yeah, it started. That book started everything. It was basically a record of the Pathans. Our history goes back to about the 13th century.
Mm-hmm.
Um, India, our progenitor came to the what is now the frontier between Afghanistan and Pakistan. He came there first, then eventually ended up preaching Islam in Bengal, when the Muslims conquered it in the 13th or 12th century. He's still buried there in a place called Sunargaon or Mograpada in Bangladesh, near Sunargaon. It's only a couple of miles there. I've been there, and his mausoleum is still there. So I wanted to record all those for future generations. And this was the start of the book. And it ends with the partition of India and how we moved and what happened to us and so on. And the Jalandhar district was a Muslim majority area, and there was naturally an expectation that it would be um, allocated to Pakistan because the partition was supposedly carried out on mostly religious basis or majority of population basis. Um, Same with Gurdaspur. My father was a judge and he opted for Pakistan to serve in Pakistan. And the High Court at that time appointed him in Batala, which is a subdivision of Gurdaspur.
Mm-hmm.
And the High Court also was obviously at that time of the view that Gurdaspur will be allocated to India or Pakistan, but they didn't. And what is a telling piece of evidence is about um, the British scheme of things, that they wanted Kashmir to be joined with India somehow. Kashmir didn't have a, a, a common border with India. If you divided along religious or the majority of community lines. And the thing I find, which is proof of this, is that one sub-district, Shakargarh, of Gurdaspur district, was allocated to Pakistan because it was on the other side of Ravi. Except the northeast corner, this man took away the northeast corner, which linked Kashmir with rest of India. Otherwise, all of Kashmir's communications were through what is now Pakistan, through Sialkot, major area, then Gujarat, and then from Rawalpindi, which was the main access to, provided the main access to Srinagar Valley. So it was a planned thing, and as another British historian has written, that Radcliffe was a lawyer and he came with a brief from the British government. This is where you're going to draw the line. The only problem was that he had drawn the line which included Zira and Firozpur subdivisions in Pakistan. And when that information was leaked to the Congress party, they prevailed on Mountbatten, who prevailed on Radcliffe to alter the boundary line again. Now, there were
Mhm.
two problems with that. One was that they had already sent a copy of the map to the governor of Lahore. There's a fellow called Jenkins. And
Yeah.
Jenkins kept it, under lock and key in his safe and forgot it there. So the
Mm.
next governor that came from Pakistan side, he saw this map and he gave it to Jinnah that this is what they've done. They have given two sub-districts, which were already included for Pakistan to India. And this is what happened. Now, apart from myself, this is how it becomes interesting with my talk with Beaumont.
Mhm.
During the conversation, it turned out that there were only 4 people who knew that this had this, jiggery pokery had been done
Yeah.
between Mountbatten and Radcliffe. And these were Radcliffe himself, Mountbatten, uh, Mountbatten's chief of staff, a fellow called Lord Ismay,
Mhm.
and Beaumont. After the independence, they went back to England and they swore that they will never reveal it to anyone. Christopher Beaumont became a judge in
Yeah.
Britain, and judges have a, sort of particularly enhanced sense of morality and ethics. And
Yeah.
he couldn't take it. So when the other 3 died, he wrote a deposition. And
Mhm.
he wrote this deposition, and he said he gave it to the warden of the All Souls College in Oxford, where he had studied, to keep it with him. And in it, he said that it can only be opened after his death, and that too with the permission of the British Foreign Office
Mhm.
and the warden of the All Souls College. And so I had, discussions with him and arguments, and I said, "What is the use of this deposition? Because if I wanted it, nobody is going to give it to me." And so your purpose of writing this thing to assuage your conscience will not be served. So you should give it in your lifetime, and so have access to the other people who suffered it as that. Because
Mhm.
so he said that he'll think about it. Then one day I was sitting in Canada, and I got a letter, and
Wow.
in that letter was this deposition. And then I published that deposition as an annex to the book written. And
That's
this is
amazing.
the
Yeah.
story of the partition, but very
Yeah.
few people know this. And because these days nobody reads books, they sort of rely on Google.
But thanks to you, thanks to our, like event today, I think a lot of people will come to know about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad actually
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people were
Um,
aware about it.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are just joining, you're watching Sunday Stories live from the 1947 Partition Archive. The guest for today is Khan Hussan Zia, and my name is Parul Srivastava. And please do not forget to post your questions in the comment section because we have our Q&A session coming up. Oh, we already have one question. So if we could start with a question from Vishram G. Nayak. He asks that the Lahore Declaration, you say, itself opined a loose confederation rather than an outright in your face separation. So we need to revisit this with uh, con- contemporary contemporary times and be future ready and not a continuous failure as it is ongoing. um,
and be future ready and not continuous. Yeah, I think so. I couldn't agree more that more and more people need to understand this thing and not let these myths bar the way or pollute history. I
Mhm.
firmly believe that. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Can we have the next question? Yeah. So Sudeep Sahu says that partition was most cruel, inhumane incident in the history of humanity. We're still not ready to learn, which is true. So still, citizens are facing in the world, different kinds of partition, different kinds of migration. So I agree with that. What do you have to say to that?
Yes, I fully support you. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy, and I think still remains the biggest migration of people at any one time in the
Exactly. Yeah.
history of humanity. It was awful. I was an eyewitness. I saw this coming, and I don't want to go into the details of it because they're so horrifying that it just isn't true. I mean, it's just unbelievable the kind of cruelty that went on or was allowed to go on. And it's not a question of one side did more than the other. It is a question of, as Muslims, one believes in the Quran, and the Quran says if you kill one person, it is as if you have killed all humanity. And so it's totally unjustifiable, totally unnecessary, and uncalled for. It should never have been allowed. That's why I say that it's not the people, or not no business of religion that it happened. It happened because of abdication of responsibility by the British government and by politicians in India. It's and there are great lessons to be learned in this, and
Yeah.
there's no point in going into other places where this thing sort of happened.
Absolutely. I
Take
totally.
Palestine, if you like. Yeah,
And I agree with you because, like you said, this is the largest, like human migration that has been recorded in history. And still, what's painful is that people, they mostly know, everybody knows about the world wars, right? But not everybody knows about partition.
yeah,
And there is so much, that you can learn from this so as to not repeat this in the future.
yeah, yeah. This is another thing. You see that in India, very little. When I say India, I mean the subcontinent. Very little effort has been made to do in-depth research. Now that an amateur student of history like myself, if I can dig up these things, why couldn't the so-called, sort of historians who write textbooks
Hmm.
and I still to this day it marvel at that the best history books of India are written by foreigners. You know, people. There's a man I admire most. I think, as far as partition is concerned, written the best history. Wonderful book called "Liberty or Death." A fellow called Patrick French,
Hmm. Hmm.
an Englishman. Very good work, and he's done remarkably because he's the only one I know. You see, there was a thing called the IPI, which
Hmm.
I don't think more than a dozen people knew it existed. It was called the Indian Police Intelligence. It was managed from London,
Hmm.
and the information was gathered, collected in Delhi, and from all over India by these people, and then stored in India. But just before uh, India got independence, they shifted all the records to England and wouldn't tell anyone about it and wouldn't release them. So this man spent 2 years badgering them
Yeah.
and doing all sorts of things. Eventually, they released it to him. I don't know if anyone else has read it. And that contains a wealth of information, the real information about what
Yeah.
was going on inside.
Yeah.
It's a pity because we people become subjective also, both sides, India and Pakistan, they are afraid of truth and they become very subjective in writing it, which makes the whole thing exercise worthless.
Yeah.
You have to be objective and you have to write the facts as they happen,
Yeah.
regardless of, you can't, as a historian, you have no business sitting in judgment, passing,
Yeah.
withholding information. That sort of thing is very terribly dishonest.
Yeah.
And you can't do that.
I mean, it's great injustice if a historian is, like bringing his or her own bias into history writing.
Oh, yes. But some extent it's natural. One
Yeah.
can understand it. But you have to keep questioning yourself. Am I being honest? Am I
Yeah.
being, objective? That's the way to write history.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you shouldn't write it, I think.
That's true. And like you mentioned, things regarding access to archival information, like that how a lot of files became available only in the 1980s. And even till today, we do
Yeah,
not have, like full access to each and every file of those times. That
yeah,
also is a big hindrance in
yeah,
history
yeah.
writing.
That was the main history. Actually, funnily enough, having condemned the historians of India and Pakistan, one of the good ones is an Indian, a gentleman called, I think he became the Chief Justice of India in the 60s or something like that, maybe 70s. Um, he has written a book called Legend and Reality, I think it's called. His name is H.M. Sirvai.
Okay.
Um, he's a lawyer and a judge, and he's written a, uh, to my way of thinking, a good book from India, the best one by an Indian I have or a Pakistani that I have read. But there were very far and few actually of them.
Okay. I mean, that's good to know. I think a lot of people would go ahead and, sort of Google search that
Yeah, you
and
should.
yeah,
You
and
should.
find out for
He's,
themselves. Yeah.
yeah, he's a. I think he is one of those people I admire because he overcame his personal prejudices or whatever they were. But he's done well.
Yeah. Um, I was also thinking that because you were yourself born in Jalandhar and then you had to migrate to Sialkot. Is there anything that you would be willing to share with our audience? Something which does not.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on forever, but I'll tell you two or three instances bit quickly. Um, one is that when my father was transferred to Batala, the civil servants were given 10 days what they call joining time. So it was Eid festival was around the corner or was fell between in those 10 days. And my father decided that we'll go to Jalandhar and spend the Eid there.
Mm.
And from there go to Bitala, which is not very far from Jalandhar. And all the family, we packed up bags. And what we didn't know was that there had been terrible riots in Jalandhar. And the place was under curfew. And when the train arrived, we got down and maybe a few other people, but they walked away. And we were left because we had, sort of baggage with us, trunks, and my mother and sisters. And we were left stranded on the railway station with no transport to go to the Basti. And my father rang up the additional district magistrate who's responsible for all the district administration.
Yeah.
He knew him. He was a Hindu. He knew him personally. they had served together, and he asked him that, explain that this is how he is stuck
Mhm.
at the railway station, and if he would help. And he said, don't worry, sit there, wait, I'll send a transport. And that transport never came, and hours went by. And my father kept going to the um, station master's office to telephone, and he looked very worried and I didn't understand it. I was a 13-year-old child,
Mhm.
and why he was worried, I just sat there twiddling my thumbs. And then when the sort of it became closer to evening time or sunset, a car appeared outside the railway station, and a man, bearded fellow, came out of that thing. And it turned out that he was president of the local Muslim League party. And he asked looked at my father and he said, "Oh, Ziaullah Khan, you are here." And I said, "We got information that there was a Muslim massacre and Sikhs were preparing to, you know, do whatever they did to people, and you shouldn't stay here even 1 minute." That's when I realized that, Sikhs had started gathering, but they wouldn't come near us. They would gather on the other side of the railway lines. We were on one side, and then sitting on a platform, and the Sikhs were gathering on the other side. All youth, no, old man or woman or anything like that. And they would keep looking and, looking at us, and then they would go back. And so subsequently, it occurred, that what they were afraid of was my father had two guns. And those guns, their barrels were too long. They couldn't be stored in the trunks. So they were lying outside. And the Sikhs were looking at these guns, and they didn't like the prospects of these guns being used. So they didn't attack in all this time. And that's one incident. The other one is that I don't want to go into all what I saw, um, but when we arrived in Lahore, I knew was a very fun place. You always looked forward to going to Lahore, and Lahore was terribly deserted. There was nothing there. All the shops were closed, the schools were closed, the hospitals were closed. There's absolutely nothing, no people on the roads. And one day I was walking, alone, and I saw a refugee truck come. And it took a sharp turn on Firozpur Road, and people fell out because the truck turned on its side. They got up and they all sort of, dusted their clothes and put the truck upright and then went away. And young boy standing there, not having anything to do. So suddenly I found that there was about 8, 9 months, maybe 10 months old child lying there unconscious. So I picked it up and I was looking at this child. He's a plump little boy and very, I still get emotional when I think of him. And he was unconscious. And I saw a sort of little trickle of blood coming out of one of his ears as I held him. I didn't know what to do. And then a car came, and a black car, and there was a lady sitting on the front seat, and she asked me, "What are you doing? What is this?" So I told her this, and she said, "Give me the baby." And as I was passing the baby on to her, he took a couple of deep breaths like that, and then he stopped breathing. So I don't know. And I stood there wondering what happened. You know, what happened to the mother? Why didn't she cry out? Probably she was not there. I don't know. To this day, I wonder why didn't the truck come back for him? Just then another bit of nonsense I saw was very bad. Walking with my father on Temple Road, Lahore. It was a very busy road, and there are lots of shops there and so on. And there's no one, absolutely deserted. All the shops were closed. And I was walking with my father and looking around, and I saw a man walking on the platforms, sort of outside the shops.
Yeah.
And he was well dressed, and he had a felt hat on, and sort of Western dress. And suddenly my father turned around and said to me, he said, "Don't move and don't look and don't see anything." You know. So I looked the other way, and my father went maybe about 30, 40 feet, something like that. And on the platform outside one of the shops, he was holding this man, and he kept holding him, and then eventually, I mean, sort of in his lap kind of thing. And then he left him there, and he came back. And he said, this was a poor Hindu. And he was going, and he had a chit in his hand where he said to the police written to the local police official that I am a Hindu and I need protection because I fear for my safety, and please help me, or something, words to that effect. So he said, this is what it is. And then I saw a man opening one of the shops and disappearing inside, wearing sort of bad clothes. And my father said that this bastard went and stabbed this poor man, and he died. And he took this chit in his hand, and as we walked, if he had walked another probably 50 yards or 60 yards, there was a police station. He was walking to that police station. He would have been alive. If he had left, 10 minutes, 5 minutes earlier, he would have been living today. But I still, you get affected by it. What was the need for killing a poorly, unharmed, harmless man who didn't mean any bad thing to anyone? This was madness. But this is what partition was. It was madness. Then on the other side, there's another story I like to tell everyone, just to sort of change the mood. When we moved to Sialkot, we were living on a road called Paris Road. Then it was called Paris, I don't know what it's called now. And next to this was some kind of 2-3 shops, and above them was a apartment sort of thing. And they were all locked, and because the Hindus had gone, obviously they belonged to some Hindus. They had gone, and we never bothered because all that was a Hindu locality. The houses were locked. Nobody moved there. There was no one. And one day in the evening, I thought one of the windows opened slightly, and I saw a shadow inside. So I came and told my mother, I said that, there is somebody there in that building. And she said, don't tell anyone. And just keep watching, but don't tell anyone. Don't let anyone know. Even in the house, don't mention it. And then she cooked some vegetarian food. And she gave it to me. She said, when it's dark, go and put it on the windowsill outside his window. Poor fellow must be hungry. That's why he's looking for. And this thing went on. My these sort of trips to this thing in the evening, taking vegetables, and the Hindu would sort of find out from inside that there was food there, and so he would open the window, take it in, and shut the window again. It went on for I don't know a good part of a month. I think all of October, most of it. I think I don't know. And then my father, he was a judge, so he organized a police escort for him. Hired a Tonga, and the border was only about 5 miles, Jammu border. So he told them to go and deliver him to the Indian authorities. And I still think, what happened? Did he find his family? Because one of the tragedies of partition, which are not mentioned, is two of them. One is the women, the number of women. It is in Pakistan, they took a census. They reckon that something like 70,000 Muslim women were unaccounted for. And I'm sure there were something like that number, I don't know how much, on Pakistan side, because there's no way of finding out.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that, again, it's gone off. This old age gets you. Sorry, you raised the point.
No, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Hiding the. Sorry, it's gone.
No, I was actually just thinking that, like it's really thoughtful of your mother to have done that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Partition is actually, about many such stories because, I've also interviewed a lot of people in India and I have come across so many people who were held by their Muslim neighbors in, what is today Pakistan
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah, because we are all human beings. This is basically it. A religion is a belief system. You believe what you believe, and it has nothing to do with me. So, that's how it should be. That's how it was most
Exactly.
of the time.
Yeah.
And until these circumstances were created, that's why I say that it's not religion. It's
Yeah.
not, the nature of man. It is the circumstances which were created. And the
Yeah.
people who are responsible for it are still not being recognized as such. Why did the British want to leave in such a hurry? Because they were very selfish. They wanted to, have no trouble on their hands. They didn't want to spend any more money. They had decided to leave India, so why should they be bothered? And they had the media under control, and they have hidden this fact until now. They still don't talk about it. And same with the Indian National Congress. I mean, how can you do that, not foresee the consequences of what you are doing? Why are you pushing? If you've decided on partition, well, if independence comes 10 days earlier, even independence was not needed. All you needed was time for the local administration. And the Indian civil service under the British were probably, my father used to say, the best in history of mankind. They were so good.
Yeah.
And they were there, all they wanted was the opportunity to get things in order, to control matters. The
Absolutely.
terrible serious mistakes were made. In East Punjab, I know because I was there, the biggest mistake they made was that, you see, the police was about 60 or 80% of the lower echelons of police, the people do all the street work
Mhm.
and so on, were Muslims. So happened that the British recruited Muslims for that sort of thing.
Um,
Uh, The first thing they did was the East Punjab government was to disarm them and disband them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you see, this is also goes to show the frame of mind of people. These people had become like me. We had become Indian nationals. Why were you discriminating against Indian nationals just because I happen to be born a Muslim?
Yeah.
So I had to leave. They had to disarm, and then if trouble comes, it's only natural. If there is no police
Yeah.
available with you, then what do you expect?
Uh, I mean, I this is so fascinating to hear from you, and I think we can go on and on with this.
Yeah,
You were so like full of stories, full of experience, of course, but then unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time now, and we'll have to wrap this up.
yeah.
So thank you so much, Hussan Zia Khan, for joining us today. For like sharing your experience, your research, your different point of views with our audience today. And we from the 1947 Partition Archive are really thankful to you for that.
No, you've done very well. Well, actually, I admire the work you are doing because nobody else did. It should have been done in India and Pakistan, and here it's done in the United States. It just goes to show that how little regard we have for our own history.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
And just to close off, I'd like to say that the 1947 Partition Archive documents the nearly lost oral histories of partition. And our flagship oral history project is the largest of its kind in South Asia. And so far, we've documented almost 10,000 family stories in not just the Indian subcontinent, but across the globe. And like the last two seasons, we have a brilliant lineup of speakers once again. So please spread the word and do not forget to hop on with us every Sunday. Um, Please, I mean, next episode we have Dr. and Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, who does not need any introduction in the field of partition studies. So be sure to join us. Thank you once again for coming on the fifth episode of Sunday Stories Live, and have a good night.
thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much. Thank you.
Thank you, and to Anchal as well.
Yeah, thank you.